Okay, so welcome here. So this week, what we want to talk about is DeFi, and we want to talk about the history, the state of the art, and the future of where we think it's going. Gordon and I are lucky to have two great panelists. We have Medha Parlikar from CasperLabs, the CTO, but really those three letters do not explain the meaning and importance that Medha has at Casper. And we have David Johnston, who has been around and ahead of the curve so many times that it's boring. So why don't we start with Medha? What I'd really like to do is talk about journeys. I'd like to talk about how we got to where we are, and how you got here, and your passion, and how that brought about your vision today.
Thanks. First of all, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to be here today. I think this is really great, what you're building this morning show to talk about DLT, so more people hopefully can learn about how important DLT is in financial markets specifically, right? And DeFi is just one thing that we hope that it's going to revolutionize. So my background is, I come from a traditional software field. I started working with technology back in the early 80s, building a computer in my dad's basement when I was, not even yet a teenager. And, really continued my passion with technology around the dawn of the internet, and worked in software as a service for about 20 years as an engineering and technology leader, either running quality control, release management, or core engineering. And, and I worked in a variety of different verticals. I worked in analytics, I worked in content delivery, I worked in AI, I worked in, content and coding. So a lot of different expertise. And, but the entire time, I really had, I've always had this kind of libertarian value system, right? Where I believe in, individualistic freedom and controls, and the ability to kind of guide our own destiny in our lives. And when I learned about, blockchain, it was in early 2017 when I learned about it. A very good friend of mine was working in an open source blockchain project, and invited me to come and program, manage, and lead that project. And that's really when I went down the rabbit hole and learned a lot about Bitcoin. And the thing that really struck me was that this was an opportunity to have a harder and more sound form of money. It became, the money for the internet, to really help drive e-commerce and, make a lot simpler and basically upend the financial markets, right? Because with the internet, what I observed is that you saw retail content and content delivery really see a fundamental shift in the way those businesses managed and ran their models. And what I see happening with blockchain is I see that financial and legal systems, the way we do business in financial and legal systems, the way they operate, is now going to experience the same kind of fundamental shift, an upending, if you would. If they're going to have to innovate or die. And that to me is like so exciting. For those of you that don't know, a lot of financial markets are still actually run by COBOL programs. And COBOL is a programming language that was developed in the 70s and 80s. And they literally use dot matrix printers and green screens and mainframes in COBOL. It's just crazy. So the time has come. I'm super excited to be part of it.
Let me start 1 second. So Medha, I'm personally finding this fascinating. You and I have recently started interacting. You're obviously extremely busy with Casper, but interacting somewhat. This is the first time I've heard your political philosophical leanings that led you down this path, as opposed to just having purely technical type discussions. So
yeah, I know what the reason I get out of bed every morning, what really makes me passionate is these values, right? And you find that a lot of people, like a good chunk of people in the crypto space, like have this notion of like, no, we need to have harder money, sounder money, and less centralized control. And I definitely fall into that camp. I just don't have a lot of faith in government, if you will. And so I've spent a lot of time looking.
Why would you ever? Why would you?
I know. Why would I? Right, going off the gold standard and all the things that they've done. I just think that there's a lot of good that we can do here.
Fantastic.
It's really interesting. I think that all the people who are strong players in this industry have a political and a social aspect of why they're doing this. That's really where the passion comes from. And I think that in the long run, that filter is going to be true to where the success is. It's going to be hard to sit in the middle between regulated and decentralized. And it's a perfect segue to David, David, tell about yourself and your background, and how you got to where you are now.
And take one poster behind you and explain one poster at the end of that, because it's like a tarot card deck. There's always something good.
Well, I love your story, Medha, and it's obviously aligned with my own. If you see F.A. Hayek across my shoulder and an ANCAP flag and a bunch of failed government currencies behind me, right? So, those, I think, that study history and economics learn sort of how fragile the government systems have been and how abject their failure has been when it comes to creating and maintaining sound money. So it is definitely time for something new. My own journey is similar. I grew up, in the early days of the internet, and I looked around and said, this is going to change the world. I built an online publishing platform when I was a kid. I played around with different technology, but my first exposure to virtual currency was actually Second Life. I know a lot of people, the first time they touched a virtual currency was the Linden Dollar. And so this is back in 2005, 2006, long before Bitcoin. And it was amazing, right? You could buy digital objects, you could create digital property. There were casinos and stock markets and all these wild things going on in the world. And that experiment kind of came to an end in January of 2007. The regulators came into the offices of Linden Labs and said, do you know what people are doing inside of Second Life? And they kind of shut all the interesting stuff down, right? And that was sort of the end of the experiment. And so when I saw Bitcoin in 2012, when a friend turned to me and said, hey, Dave, did you hear Bitcoin hit $10? I said, oh, what's Bitcoin? And after he finished explaining, I was like, wait, there's a non-governmental currency that will never be inflated by politicians and is controlled by math. Yeah, I'd like to take my green pieces of paper and switch for that, right? And so, that kind of put me on this journey with Bitcoin and blockchain to start speaking at the conferences, start at BitAngels, the first angel group in the space. Most people know me for decentralized applications. So I wrote the general theory of decentralized applications back in December of 2013. It was all kind of floating around in the ether. There's a great panel of me and Charles Hoskinson and Dan Larimer, all early 2014, debating what we should call these things, DAOs or DACs or DApps. And so it was a really amazing time, and it's been so cool to watch that sort of just emerge into reality the last 5 or 6 years. And so now I run a family office, Yeoman's Capital, and the only thing we do is invest in decentralized, peer-to-peer, open source, tokenized blockchain tech. And so it's been a real pleasure to sort of see the whole industry grow, even through these ups and downs. Kind of just kept focused, said, like you said, a larger historical perspective. Are people going to be using digital honest money in the future? Yes. Okay, then let's focus on that and not get distracted by the market volatility, but instead focus on where this is really going to change entire industries.
Well, do you mind that Bitcoin is over 16,000 now?
I don't mind. I'm not objecting. It doesn't hurt me. So it's okay. Just keep it calm, guys. Don't grow too fast. Just $1,000 a week of appreciation, that would be fine. Just don't go too far. Don't get too ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, you always struck me as like super fragile guy. No, kidding, obviously. But all right, so pick one poster behind you and just go give us a minute on one.
Well, they're kind of in a series. So I've got sort of the history of governance behind me. It's a little out of order right now, but there's
governance.
It's true. There's Iceland, which had the first parliament, the thing, almost 1,000 years ago. You have the Delaware Constitution, which I consider one of the most sort of liberty and freedom embracing in the world in the 1700s. Of course, you have the Swiss Constitution in 1847, and then you have sort of the ideal of anarcho-capitalism. And so sort of the evolution, I think, of governance is headed towards more and more empowerment for the individual. And blockchain is the ultimate expression of that, as we hold our own private keys. And through the magic of cryptography, we can all, be self-sovereign, which is something that's been very difficult to achieve over time, because you had to have all these intermediaries and you ended up with custody and things like that. And so really blockchain is is the future. As James liked to say, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. And so I sort of think of us here
I gotta do
as
this.
living all in the.
That's William
Gibson.
That's William Gibson.
Yeah.
Well, I can credit James with it anyway. I mean, he said it, right? So it's all good.
Well, actually, what William just said, it's unevenly distributed, but it's always the future in Tokyo.
But what I do say is that what happens is that people don't realize something's happened until after it's already happened, and that's really where we are right now. And that's a good segue to talk about. Okay, so we have Bitcoin, then we have Ethereum, we have smart contracts, and the world's going to change because everything can be on a contract. And then about 6 months ago, the Ethereum world changed. Right, all of a sudden, a use case emerged. The gas fees went crazy. The network, picked up velocity and content, and significant value started pouring into being locked into these smart contracts, which kind of validates the concept of where the world's going in this new regulation-free or regulated world, however you want to do it. So, Medha, from your perspective, what were you doing when this change was happening? How did you realize that it was a thing? And where are we now?
Well, gosh, like I said, I see that this is going to be a ripe upending. The financial markets are ripe for an upending, right? And just with when we were working on the internet, I was delivering content delivery systems back in 1999 for the internet. We could not have imagined Uber, right? We saw a bold world when we were working in content delivery. We saw services like Shazam and Apple Music. We saw that once bandwidth caught up, that we saw the future back then. But I think with DeFi and the financial applications beyond the mundane, right? I don't think we've even scratched the surface with respect to the interesting financial instruments and new ideas. Like, who would have thought about Airbnb and Uber, that the internet would have enabled that, right? That's crazy talk, right? If you talked about that in 1999, we had cell phones in 1999, but we would have never been able to dream, right, of what could have been possible. So I think we are just at the beginning. I think the current DeFi applications you see with yield farming are just the first use case, right? So I think, man, the field is just wide open, and there's so much opportunity for innovation, and I'm just super excited to see what comes next. Yeah. Sure.
Let me ask you a question, pick up on something you just said. You were working in these early innovative technical areas, and the comment you just made is you saw that certain things were going to happen once the bandwidth caught up.
Yeah.
So fast forward 2020, separate from people just programming DeFi better, is there any other structural impediment that needs to catch up, infrastructure or anything, in order to enable this blooming of DeFi?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look back through history with technology, you'll see that silicon is really going to drive the performance even of DLT, right? You're going to see greater and greater infrastructure improvements in terms of bandwidth. You'll see improvements in terms of silicon. There's still a lot of opportunity in terms of bandwidth with respects to blockchain technology, right? So right now, a lot of the proof of stake networks you see, they're really limited by bandwidth. That's the number one impediment, is how long it takes for messages to traverse across the distributed network. But if you think about it, silicon has never let us down, right? We're still going to continue to improve in terms of bandwidth and fiber networks, and as we do that, you're going to see better and better performance over these networks. You get up to the speed of light, right? So I think it is very feasible to have many DLT networks that are using fiber optic cable, decentralized, in the next 10 to 15 years, and so I absolutely see much better performance.
Are we going to see nodes upon nodes of data centers connected directly by a fiber together, spread over the world to enable this? Or
I don't know if you'll see the nodes connected directly, but you will definitely see an upgrade of infrastructure, right? More and more fiber. It's the last mile that gets really expensive, right? So you've got big fiber networks connecting the big centers, right, in the United States and globally. But what you're talking about is that last mile, right? It's from the last switch point to the data center, or if people are running nodes in their homes or wherever they're running them, that's the piece. You really don't want your DLT to all be running out of Azure and AWS and Google Cloud. It's very, very tempting, but really I see that that fiber is going to play a big role in the future.
It's funny, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about high frequency trading, and there's an analogy here that I hadn't picked up before until you just said this. So it's very interesting.
Yeah,
Jake?
yeah, absolutely.
I just watched Butterfly Effect last night.
Oh, great movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting because where we are right now, and it was going through my mind, and you got there, Medha, when you were speaking, is that there really is no such thing as a decentralized network right now. As much as you can dream about it and talk about all your nodes, all the nodes run on one of 3 or 4 global clouds, which are single points of failure, which are points of potential censorship, and which are things which really, would rip the fabric of what we're looking to do, in the future. So David, talk about like how you see what's happened in the last 12 months. Like what's the change that's occurred, to the DNA? How are we evolving?
Well, it's interesting. DeFi as a concept has been around for 2 or 3 years. I remember when the original coalition of 4 or 5 dApps got together and said decentralized finance, and I think that was 2018, right? And the idea of lending crypto has been around for a while. Some of these decentralized exchanges have been around for a while. I think there's sort of these tipping points and accelerating catalysts that really push things forward. And in the case here, I really got to give a lot of credit to Uniswap's automated market making, right? Adding liquidity, creating a way to incentivize people to provide liquidity for small tokens, right? That were very illiquid. And DEXs had a really tough time the last 6 years trying to get any liquidity. All of a sudden to have hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of liquidity slushing around a decentralized exchange that anybody can instantly list on, that they can, not have to go through this Byzantine process with an exchange and, trying to fill out applications and maybe pay a giant fee to get listed. To remove all of those barriers, things sort of just unlocked, right? So, sort of rewind a little bit to December of last year, January, we were just about to cross $1 billion in the contracts. And I'd sort of been saying DeFi is going to be the story of 2020. But the reason I saw that is even building up to the billion, all the pieces were there, right? And then as soon as it hit $1 billion, that was sort of a trigger point for people mentally. Oh, this thing is a real, use case, and people started piling in, right? We saw the hype. I think we're up to 14 or 15 billion now, and sort of we've already been through in 1 year the hype cycle of all of these quick follow-on projects. Some of them making interesting improvements and some of them just riding the hype. But regardless, it's pulled a lot of capital into these use cases. But the use cases are effectively the same as they were 2 years ago. There's lending crypto, there's decentralized exchanges, there's these Oracle networks like Chainlink. There's all these non-custodial networks popping up and providing something new. So I think Medha really captured it beautifully earlier when she said sort of all these tools are very early and there's something they each build on top of each other. And so where I think we're headed is we're going to see more and more of this innovation using all of these money Legos, as Vitalik likes to call them, sort of now they're presumptions that of course there's a decentralized exchange, I instantly have liquidity, and what can I build on top of that, right? So that's what's exciting for me because my whole frame of reference is everything that can be decentralized will be decentralized. And I think of that as sort of an inevitability. It's only a question of, do you have all the fundamental pieces you need to build the next thing?
Wait. And then I always say, will be decentralized or should be decentralized. So we have questions from the audience. And I want to say that if you have access to the chat function, please feel free to put in questions and comments, and we'll try and address them as well as we can. Richard Ross has asked us a really good question, which goes back to the base level where the audience is. And that is, could we define DeFi? And does it require smart contracts? Or is it just the use of permissionless DLT in the finance area? Medha, you want to take a shot at that?
Oh yeah, I think DeFi is definitely more than just, it's gonna be more than just smart contracts, right? It's gonna be all the things that you need in order to enable using the smart contracts. It's gonna be wallet technology. It's gonna be mobile technology, right? I think key management, like if you want to ask me what is the killer app, right? For the internet, it was the browser. I think the killer app for blockchain is going to be a wallet. It's going to be a wallet that is going to be so easy to use that people can custody their own keys without having to deal with a lot of the underlying cryptography, right? So whoever builds that killer wallet is the one that's going to really unlock, blockchain for the masses. So I think wallets are hugely important, making it really, really easy for people to use. I think that's going to be the big enabler for DeFi.
What's the delta now between the wallets that are currently available, besides for the fact that they seem to fork Ethereum at will? What do we need to do between the wallets that are available now and this not perfect, but this ideal wallet that you have in mind? What's the gap?
I think there's a couple of things. I think I think the biggest thing is going to be recovery. And I don't think the recovery story is very good with keys. Like even right now, if I swap out my iPhone, my Google Authenticator keys, like whatever's stored on the hardware are gone. It's like really a pain if I get a new phone to push over all of my keys. So if you even look at 2FA today, the story isn't great, right? To recover your 2FA keys. And I think that we have to be able to do better than that. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not directly in that space, but I trust that somebody's going to solve it.
Fair enough. James?
Yeah. David, do you have any thoughts there?
Well, I was going to riff off of that is, I think I really love how Andreas describes security, right? There's things passwords and information. There's things you are, right? Biometrics. And there's things you have, which, device in your pocket, right? And the early internet, for whatever reason, maybe it's technological barriers, they really only started with what you know. Type in your magical 6 letters, and that wasn't very secure because people all use the same passwords or are very predictable in their behavior, right? And so you have massive amounts of data breach. So over time, we're trying to get to 2FA, which is what you have, a device in your pocket. That's much harder for somebody to take over. Though, unfortunately, everybody started with SMS. And it's really easy to port a phone number. Any 18-year-old running the kiosk at Sprint can use his magic powers to change a phone number, and all of a sudden, right, he can take over somebody's account, right? So we needed to get to Google Authenticator. We needed to get to physical keys, things like that. It's slowly getting there. But honestly, I think the gold standard is a combination of who you are and what you have. So you want a biometric, and you want your device, and honestly, you want no password. And this is what we're starting to see on the custody side. There's groups that are moving purely to biometrics, and there is no password to remember. Right now, this doesn't work on all devices. So right now, that only works on iPhone devices, right? So you have to have that Apple infrastructure that has that trusted element.
And it may not work too well when you're dead.
Right. See, I don't like biometrics because I don't want my eyeball to be worth more than my life.
Well,
you saw that movie too.
It's why it's a combination, right? It's why you want a device also, and you want something else. But this idea that the town I was born in is secret information that I can use to unlock my account is ridiculous, right? It's on all my social media. But anybody who knows me in passing, it's.
Well, this is like one of Marco's big things. Like, who are you? What is your identity? What is your identity in different contexts? How do you share just enough of it? And as more value moves online, it's going to become ever more critical.
I think we moved from 2FA to MFA, right? So it's going to end up becoming multi-factor. And as long as those factors are identifiable, that's, again, a attack vector. So I think it should be a wide array of factors that could be combined to create. And I think they should rotate and change even in specific environments so that you can't attack it knowing what to cycle through. I actually saw a really interesting wallet last night, and I agree totally with Medha that the wallet is the key, but it has to be once you no longer even realize that it's a wallet, right? Yeah. It's got to be just your interface. Like, listen, every business is going to be a wallet and going to be an exchange, right? Because if everything gets digitized and digital eats the world, which is my thesis since 1996, right? And if that happens, then every company is dealing with data. They need to be able to accept it, let you manipulate it and store it and deliver it. So they're an exchange. So a business that comes to me now that says they're an exchange or they're a wallet, I'm like, oh, that's great. You use Microsoft Word. That's what an accomplishment, right? The question is, what do you do with it and how does it work? And what you're looking at now is that all these pieces are out there freely floating. Identification, functionality, earning interest, communication with other parties. They're all out there right now, but they're kind of not attached yet. And the way the internet works is in layers, is that first the base problem gets solved, and then someone comes and aggregates a bunch of what exists, which is interesting and opens it up to a slightly larger audience, but still not to the public. And as you move up this almost Maslow's pyramid, you get to the point where, okay, I can now use my face, log in, see my value, push a button, get yield, right? And I think that's where we're going with DeFi, because that's where everything goes. That's how travel went on the internet. That's how search goes on the internet, right? So there's some people here talking about the legacy companies in our chat. Like, where does Visa fit in? If I'm a heretic, to this conversation when I say that, that Visa has a place in the future and that banks will exist in 10 years, what is that place where they fit?
I can take this. So I observed a very interesting upending of the content delivery markets, right? So I was the director of quality assurance at mp3.com. And those of you that were around in 99, 98, remember the very big, the largest copyright lawsuit ever was filed and won by the RIA against mp3.com. And we saw the upending, the demise of Blockbuster. We saw video delivery, we saw Netflix, and they resisted for a long, long time, right? And even though digital content would yield them more money, they were very late to adopt, and they actually fought the entire time the revolution that was ultimately coming. Like the genie was out of the bottle with Napster. The genie was out of the bottle with, people were able to encode content and share it. And BitTorrent, Napster, all of these services made it impossible for them to ignore, but they were so far behind. And I think that the finance world is waking up to that. They definitely see the writing on the wall, right? You've got the JP Morgan Chase blockchain, which is a centralized chain, but they're afraid of losing control. It is very similar to the content. I see a lot of similarities, right? The content creators, the content owners basically have centralized control over content. They decided what was a good movie. They decided what you got to watch. It's the same thing here. The banking system has like a chokehold on finance right now, and they see the writing on the wall that they're going to have to adapt, right, or die. So they are definitely looking at blockchain very closely. They recognize that they're going to have to provide a better value to the consumer if they want to play in this market, and I think that's a good thing for everybody.
James, let me throw a question to you, and could you like a panelist? One thing I've gotten to, I think I understand about your philosophy and approach to things is that to be a little bit crass, it's hard to be a little bit pregnant when it comes to regulation. You either need to play in the regulated world or just be a pirate and just live that happy pirate life. It's hard to be a little bit regulated. How do you see DeFi threading that needle, especially given that financial markets are so inconsistently regulated globally, but yet this is an inherently global market? Should DeFi aspire to be regulated? Just give us your thoughts on that, and then we can open it up.
Well, to again, a quote that's not mine, pirates have more fun. What my belief is that once you make the first move towards being compliant from a regulatory perspective, you've basically defined your roadmap forward, that you're going to have to become completely compliant, because you've given yourself an attack vector. You've anchored yourself to a system which now has a single point of failure where they can approach you and control you and censor you. So you have to make a decision early on. Am I going to be in the new world, which we'll call it unregulated right now, but the truth is it is regulated. It's just regulated in a different way. It's regulated by the intelligence of the crowd. It's regulated by people using their feet, to find the exit if they don't like it, right? And it's a different kind of regulation because it matches the self-interest of the participants with the platform, as opposed to the legacy world where your participation in a regulated environment is to support other institutions. And so I do believe that you can't be in both worlds. from my perspective, there'll be uses for both, and there'll be people who want to participate in each. And what I seek is a world where you can make that choice, because I believe that the way that you hold your money and the way that you spend your money is actually the ultimate expression of your freedom of will, your freedom of expression. Because I might tell you BS when I'm on TV, and making up stories, but I'm not making it up when I spend my money. Right, where I park my money in an investment, or I buy a consumer good, I'm doing it because that's what I want, and that purchase is a representation of my will. And so I'd like to have the opportunity to act freely as I wish, and if I wish to rely on a centralized organization, to then turn and be able to do that as well. And I think that that's a conscious decision that platforms need to make.
Fair enough. And then David, speaking for a friend, not for us or anyone does DeFi, is it in the domain, should it exist in the domain of regulated, the domain of beyond? And by regulated, I want to acknowledge what James said, that there's market regulation. I mean, regulation just means to adjust in response to feedback and keep within a certain range. That's one way I look at it. It's like it's sort of a cybernetic type thing. There's market regulation, there's governmental regulation. So clearly market regulation, I think, must apply to DeFi. If you don't want to use a platform, you don't use it. But do you think, does government, there's the normative thing, like, should government regulate DeFi? And then there's the next thing, functionally, like, must it regulate it, and must you deal with governments? So just take that.
So again, going back to the whole Linden Labs thing, the reason it didn't work was because it was a company in California, and there was no way they could comply with all the myriad of every potential regulation in the world in all jurisdictions, right? And so they had to just use the blunt instrument of stopping all those interesting activities on their platform, right? And so to draw the analogy here, the reason Bitcoin succeeded is it wasn't a company. It was open source. There was no central point of failure. And, it's not perfectly decentralized, but it was enough decentralized that it was able to flourish, and people could build companies on top of it, like Coinbase, that could do a very specific application, sending, receiving, paying for things, and be regulated in specific jurisdictions. So by separating the neutral layer underneath, where it's just value transfer, it doesn't know about jurisdictions, there's no custodianship, there's no custody, and having above that an application layer where people do specific compliance, that was the genius, right? Because like you said, you're never going to get away from regulation, either in the sense of governmental or in the government sense of market.
Well, sorry, I'm not quite saying that. I think it may be possible to get away from government regulation with something that's sufficiently decentralized. I don't think we'll ever get.
That's my point. To the degree that you can push decentralization and everything into neutral layers, then that's a reality. As much as it's an application that has to be run by a company and there's not the infrastructure yet to decentralize it, then you live in regulated land. And so what we've seen is an expansion of what can be decentralized more and more, right? We started with the money layer, and then we got smart contracts, and now we've got decentralized exchanges, and now you've got oracles, and so on and so forth, right? We're pushing up further and further the tech stack and closer to the ultimate end user, what can be fully decentralized. That's the dream, right? That's effectively my entire thesis, is fund everything that gets us closer to having a fully decentralized world where the end user needs no company, right? And never has to touch something that isn't a peer-to-peer network or an open source product, right? And the limitation of open source in the past, it wasn't monetizable, right? So even though Linux conquered the world of servers and eventually conquered the world of operating systems via Android and all the rest, it didn't end up in consumer products because it wasn't monetizable in a traditional way, right?
Well, it surely did. I mean, every home router is on Linux now. We just don't know it. But
yes.
I think you mean it hasn't conquered the desktop market.
It hasn't conquered the end application market is what I mean. You're probably not using an open source search engine. You're probably not using an open source social media. You're probably not using an open source chat app, though those finally are available in the form of Signal and a few others, but they're not yet 99% of the market, right? So, but by having an incentivization mechanism with the token, all of a sudden a brilliant entrepreneur or engineer can get paid for their work and imagine themselves being massively successful using that model instead of starting a Delaware company one day doing an IPO, right? We've gotten past that mental model, and now the smartest people in the world are building open user-owned networks.
Interesting. James?
You both are working on really interesting projects, but truthfully, portfolios of interesting projects. And I want to give you a little moment to talk about what you're specifically working on. The problem that was the most pressing that you saw in the market, and what are you doing about it now? Because you're both not just talkers, you're both doers, right? Which is what I love about you guys. Medha, you want to?
I can go first. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm building a new layer 1 protocol, right, based on the Casper research. That's why we're called Casper. And there's really two problems that we're solving. One, we want to have a pure proof of stake, correct, decentralized blockchain protocol that is easy for both DeFi applications to build on, but also for businesses to integrate distributed ledger technology, even if it's a centralized application, to leverage the benefit of the trust layer in the blockchain, right? So we're building a blockchain that is usable both by decentralized protocols, but also usable very much by business, right? We believe that the use of permissioned and private blockchain implementations is a result of lack of control over those that want to actually deploy centrally controlled contracts, right? So we make it possible for responsible contract owners to maintain and manage their on-chain code, right? And they can also do this in a decentralized fashion. So you can have multi-signature upgrades, et cetera, et cetera. So we've built in a lot of features that enable the governance of smart contract code in a nutshell, along with the performance improvements and the security and the permissionless nature of a pure proof of stake protocol. That's what we're working on.
Let me jump in there. Medha, I'm always interested in this. How exactly did you and Casper connect?
Oh my gosh, this is a funny story. So I was working on an open source project, and there was an open source blockchain project, actually. I was the program manager and kind of the head of engineering for that project. And that project went belly up. And so a lot of investors believed in the charter of that project. And so I was approached by Scott and Renal to, will you go do this? We believe in what this project was trying to do. They did not execute correctly. So let's go finish the work that was started. And so they approached me to found the company with them. So that's how I wound up here. Yeah.
That's great.
David?
So, with the family office, Yeoman's Capital, we've supported a lot of open source projects. But going back to the thesis, I'm always trying to push the envelope of what can be done next. And last year, oracles really busted onto the scene, decentralized oracles, right? And a particular project that I've ended up spending a lot of time writing and talking about is PegNet, PEGNET. Really focused on pegged assets. And what really drew me to that is the idea of getting away from centralized reserves, getting away from pooled collateral, and instead using the honesty of a blockchain ledger to publish and secure oracle prices for gold and silver and dollars and cryptos. All of these assets could be, effectively represented without all the third parties, without all the intermediaries, because that's really where things started, right? Was with Tether on Mastercoin in 2014. Here we got a bank account of dollars, we promise, and trust us, and here's a token to represent each one.
Wait, what are you implying? Are you implying that Tether doesn't have exact one-for-one correlation?
I think we know from legal filings they don't, but and that's unfortunate. And so,
wait a minute, we're losing bandwidth. I can't get signal. What's going on here?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So,
yeah, watch out. But Facebook's going to censor us now.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's one of those things that everybody in the industry knows, but people kind of don't talk about or don't deal with. And so, the only way you solve those kind of problems is with a fundamentally different approach. It really reminds me of the early days of Bitcoin. People still said in 2012, but Bitcoin's not backed by anything. There's no gold. There's no dollars. And Satoshi would say, that's the point. There's no central point of failure. He built a system entirely based on economics and scarcity and the utility of sending money over the internet. And that's really magical. We've kind of forgotten, we now take for granted, of course, Bitcoins are worth $16,000 a piece. There's only 21 million. Everybody knows that, right? But at the time, it was very controversial. Every economist of any stature was telling people that Bitcoin didn't make any sense because it had no collateral, it had no reserve. And so looking at a system like PegNet, which is trying to pioneer this approach with oracles, is like extending that vision of Bitcoin to all the world's other assets. It's got currencies and metals and commodities and all the cryptos. I want a pegged asset that I can seamlessly send and receive and transfer and convert into other pegged assets at a tenth of a penny and never leaves my wallet. There's no counterparty. In PegNet, people aren't trading with somebody else. There's no order book. It's just doing conversion inside your own wallet based on an Oracle feed. And so they used proof of work miners, old-fashioned proof of work miners, and now proof of stake to secure the Oracle data, right? And so you have economic incentives for people to create honest data feeds and for users then to leverage those to do these synthetic or pegged assets. So that's, to me, really incredible, because if we can crack that code, and it hasn't been easy, the team, that's distributed all around the world. They did no token sale. There's no formal company or foundation. It's just a community of people that have been building this. They spent a year figuring out all the edge cases around oracles, right? What if the miners go off the rails? What if the APIs from the exchange are bad? What if it's a small coin and it doesn't have enough data feeds? Like, they've had to figure out all that stuff, but they're getting there, right? And the fact that they're trying a new approach is what's really interesting to me, because that's how I think you get the big changes.
Dave,
Right.
let me ask
Wait, Gordon, wait a second. I tried to give Medha and David a softball, and as usual, they've illustrated how much smarter they are than all the rest of us, and I have no idea what they just said. So, starting with you, David, to the simple English, what is PegNet, and why does it matter to the general public? And then Medha, I'm going to come back to you with the same question for Casper.
PegNet.
First of all, start with, what is it?
PegNet is the freedom to send any value I want to any other person, or convert that value into any other form that I want for a tenth of a penny. Done. Right? That's it. All the tech in the back end just enables that statement to remove all the intermediaries. That's it.
So you're solving for complexity, and you're solving for cost, and you're solving for security, right?
And you're solving for making it really fully decentralized, where there's no other parties involved. It's you and the protocol, nobody else, no pooled collateral. There's no smart contract to hack. It's just you and the protocol. And I think that's how it should be.
I love it, because David, as usual, is ahead of the curve. So he created a DAO before people knew what a DAO was. And Medha, talk to us about Casper, again, not from technical, but really from, why does it matter to me if I'm IBM, and why does it matter to me if I'm James, the investor?
Yep. So what we're solving for is complexity, right? Blockchain technology is very hard to use for business right now. It's not really built for business. And there's the decentralized protocols that are immutable, right? So we're solving for the immutability of code problem is one of the big problems we're solving. And then the governance of code is the big problem that we're solving for. So you can actually govern your code on the blockchain however you wish, right? So the protocol is flexible enough to let you do what you need to do to manage your on-chain code. I mean, that's the really big thing that enables decentralized blockchain to be adopted more broadly in the market.
So, like James, you lost me, and I'll admit that you lost me. The immutability of code is a problem.
Yeah.
So
So
you're a nice, friendly lawyer.
Yeah. So no, just imagine. So like, if you bought an application, say, you wanted to use an email service or Microsoft Word, and we were all using the same version of Microsoft Word that we were using in 1985, because you can't update it. And if you wanted to update it, now you're basically all the documents you wrote in 1985 on that version of Microsoft Word, you have to go through like a manual update process, or you have to pay to move your documents from one version of Microsoft Word to the other, right? That's basically what that means. And so we're all used to getting new features and bug fixes and all of that in our software. You can't do that easily now on a majority of the distributed ledger technology that's out there. It's very, very difficult. Yeah.
So,
Beautiful.
Medha, in the market, what do you see as the next change, the next turn of the crank, and that's going to pump more energy in and bring more people into the DeFi market?
Oh boy. Like I said, I maintain that it's going to be accessibility using wallets. It's wallet application and wallet technology really getting easier to use. And I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen, right? People really need to understand how this stuff works. Like, what do you mean? Like, I just lock this in here and now I'm getting 30% interest? That's pretty cool. But there's risk, right? Like understanding, and people need to trust the new DeFi protocols, right? So there's a big trust layer here around, ferreting out bugs. I remember going back to the internet, I think the same adoption curve applies. There was a long time where people did not put their credit cards into any e-commerce sites, right? And I think that there's going to be this tipping point where we can start trusting a lot of the protocols out there. And there's going to be a standard by which you can say, I can trust this protocol because it's done these 4 or 5 things. And there may be some centralized control in that. Like, how do you, without broad consumer education, right? Like, how can people actually make informed decisions without central authorities kind of helping them make those decisions around which protocols they're going to interact with, right? I think that's a real problem. People don't have the time, energy, or sometimes even the capability of becoming deeply educated in this tech. It's complicated stuff, right? They're going to look to somebody to say, well, this protocol is trustworthy, right? You saw the Norton secured or the HTTPS, like there were things that we kind of looked to, right? To tell us, okay, it's safe for me to put my credit card in this particular, to work with this e-commerce provider, right? I think the same thing's going to apply with DeFi for broad adoption.
Is that going to be mathematically provable? Like, or are you going to require
hopefully
consulting firms?
Yeah, well, hopefully that we'll get to a place where people can actually test their code, and there's ways for us to have some, confidence around the protocols that we interact with.
I think that's going to emerge out of the market naturally. People, the person they ask is their friends. They usually ask their most technical friend, hey, which one of these works and which one will I not lose my money on? And they'll refer them to, don't use, scam exchange XYZ, use Coinbase, use Uni, right?
That's already happening. I mean, I get asked that all the time. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm always nervous about that question because, if it works, it's not like they're going to give you a commission, but if it doesn't work,
you're gonna hear about it.
Yeah, that friendship, it's like if you want to lose a friend, lend them $20. You want to see the friend and you want to see the $20. It's like, okay, I don't know.
No. Listen, there's certain questions you learn over time, certain opinions you learn not to give, right? David, I love how you jumped in right with the question that was on my mind, which was, the bottom line here is trust and truth without trusting, right? And how does that trust evolve over time? What way I can't see that? You wearing another shirt to make me jealous?
It just says, trust me.
Exactly. That's my first sign to hold my wallet and run. So I think that the thing that people really miss, because we always evolve right directly to money, right? Like, what does it mean in dollars, and how do I make more money, and et cetera, et cetera. And people miss the fact that this revolution / evolution, it's only partially about money, and it's about money in a derivative way, right? It's more about how do we communicate, and how do we work with each other, and how do we form relationships, and what is a trusted relationship, right? And what do I need to develop that trust? And so when I look at the market right now, I see that people are starting to understand. And David, bring this back to David. David always talks about the reason he fell in love with Bitcoin was because it was governed by mathematics, right? Mathematics is a language, it's a code, it's well formed, and there's a general consensus on it, right? And so it really brings us down to a Neil Stephenson concept that language is a virus, right? Once I infect you with something, you can't get it out of your head. And we all seem to have this common language globally of mathematics, which has developed over centuries and millennia, as being something which has now been around long enough that we can trust it in the abstract. So which platforms do you guys look at right now and they make you say, wow, I wish I thought of that, or, that's a big bridge to the future? Medha, what is it that's out there other than Casper?
Other than Casper, come on.
Yeah.
Gosh, which
we know Casper's the best, but who's like second, third, and fourth is what?
Who's the rest? Who's the rest?
Yeah.
I love what some of the DeFi protocols out there are doing, right? So like what Maker's doing, they kind of blazed a trail, and they've done a great job in terms of providing value to their customers, right? So I also like some of the really up and coming newer DeFi protocols that we've been working with. I think they're just doing some incredible work. So Alchemy is one that we were early investors in. I think they're just doing incredible work with creating liquidity pools. And yeah, I think there's just some terrific DeFi protocols out there. I love seeing the innovation.
David?
For me, I'm going to go with sort of blazing paths into new areas. So I've been watching, how do we decentralize internet infrastructure for years, right? And, first there was Open Garden, and now there's Helium that is building this global network of incentivized people to put up Wi-Fi hotspots, if you will. I mean, these are hotspots on steroids, right? They reach for a mile or whatever. And so providing physical internet capacity.
Is that even allowed? I got to ask. I started thinking about Federal Trade Commission or whatever that thing is that is supposed to regulate our airwaves.
Yeah, no, there's plenty of spectrum that is open to the public and that you can use. And so they're living within those parts of the bandwidth. But I've been looking forward to this for like 5 or 6 years because the writing was on the wall. Oh, somebody could issue a token and you could mine by setting up hardware and infrastructure to give people access. Now it's interesting, especially in the cases like Nodal, where this has emerged around IoT. It's about giving people access to bandwidth for all of their devices, because that's becoming like the dominant part of bandwidth you need, right? Is the trillion internet connected devices that are coming the next 5-10 years. We're already in the billions, and we're headed towards a trillion. And so, that to me is amazing. And we're just seeing the speed of these networks. Like Helium is going global in a matter of months. People are like, oh, I can make money by doing this. And projects are popping up in North America, Europe. Now it's spreading to China. And so it's really amazing to see the speed of that. And Nodal, I think they hit 5 million active nodes in like under a year. So that area is going back to like the infrastructure that truly is decentralized. Is I imagine in a few years, my DLT app's not going to be living on Azure. It's going to be using Filecoin. It's not going to be routed through the internet. It's going to be going through Helium, right? Et cetera, et cetera. We're getting there. All these pieces are coming together. So that's the part that's amazingly exciting for me.
Let me ask a question. I'm obviously a fan of DeFi because here we are. But one thing that troubles me or challenges me is when you have a long-term centralized massive investment type thing, for example, a dam, an airport, a bridge, a fusion power plant, hopefully soon, and you require concentration of capital, concentration of management, planning, and just range and distance. So you're not, like Dave, just picking off your thing, that's something very neat that went geographically wide. But what happens when you need to go tall? Can DeFi address funding a fusion power plant? 30-year, 20 years to plan, 100 years to operate. And I'll just throw that out there.
I don't know why not. I mean, property rights.
I don't see any reason why not either. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, property rights are a thing, and therefore you can coordinate with other people and machines and build something and own something. Just because the item is singular, right? You're using something of
well, it's singular, complex, and interactively complex in a way that you can't be spontaneous. Like I don't want a fusion power plant to just be the wisdom of the crowd. Like I want a boss.
I Having actually been, close to the nuclear industry, I actually would trust the wisdom of the crowd.
Well, this is the point where you
More
and I
than the
kind of bounce back and forth every once in a while. It's like, let me get this out so you can kind of shoot it down. Part of my current view is that some things require singular controlled management, and like I don't want someone to ad hoc, a nuclear power plant by a city.
But you
So,
watch the Simpsons. Don't you
taking
watch
that
the
seriously.
Simpsons? Wait a minute. Don't you watch the Simpsons, Gordon? That's the Simpsons are always right. It's just the question of timing.
I know.
Right?
I know. Trump got president. Elon Musk.
Exactly.
I know. But
So if you want, if that's who you want running your power plants, I guess you didn't see Chernobyl on TV.
So I think what you're really saying is, how do we build these systems in a way where they leverage expertise? And I think that comes with decentralized reputation
and responsibility, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. So responsibility and having something at stake. I think we can solve both of those problems. I think we can both, have sufficient value at stake that you avoid bad actors and have sufficient expertise to run literally anything, right? In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think right now things are hobbled by the structure that they have, right? Inventions and patents and, sort of the constraining of technology. Only a few people inside these corporate walls have access to this new magical technology. Reverse that and say, now it's all open source and a public network. Everybody has access to that technology. And we've seen the speed of innovation massively accelerate. There's no 14-year lag on the patent and the expiration, right? Something's embedded in open source, and a few months later, everybody else has got it. So if you ever want to get to fusion, because they've been trying a long time and it hasn't made it very far, and even the approaches they're taking now look to be so expensive as to be much more expensive than solar or wind. So why are we doing it? That if you want those innovations, you've got to unleash that technology.
There's a quote that I love to hate about fusion, which is, it's 30 years away and always will be. So, all right, so let's do a brass tacks. Take an airport as opposed to an airfield. One is just an object, one is sort of like more systemic. If you were, and let's do an Einsteinian type thought experiment. If you wanted to build a new airport, or a group, a crowd, whatever, wanted to do a new airport using DeFi and similar decentralized techniques, tools, whatever mechanisms, what would that actually look like? And James, feel free.
Medha, why don't you try that one?
There you go. Dude, I was passing it back to you. Okay, Medha, you want to build an airport using this. What does that look like? Can it be done?
Oh boy. So I tend to fall more into your camp that you need somebody driving the ship. So here's the thing. Like, ultimately, I feel like investors or the people that own like the investment capital really are the decision makers. So if you have decentralized, basically the collateralization or the investment for any of these projects, if it in of itself is decentralized by massive people, right? And they all have a voice and they have a say and they're enfranchised and they get involved and they participate in the building of said airport, right? They would then delegate or select somebody to actually run and manage and control that. Very similarly to we have like publicly traded companies today, they have shareholders. The problem is that the majority of the shares are controlled by the few wealthy, right? And so they're the ones that really have a say. But I mean, I think we're getting back to like, do people actually spend time, money, and energy really engaging in their portfolio? Like even today, like if you own half a dozen stocks or 100 stocks or whatever, are you engaging with each of those companies regularly and participating as a meaningful shareholder? I think the same thing would map over even to in the airport case, right? So like if I had, 10,000 investors and I said I did a token raise, something similar to GoFundMe, but I tokenized the whole thing and I said, okay, via the blockchain, we're going to build this, we're going to govern it, we're going to do all that. It's really going to come down to how much people engage, right? And do they have the time and energy? Like one of the things I would like to see is I'd like to see, as a result of blockchain technology, that people are building more value day in and day out. We're not these gerbils on a wheel just running, running ourselves in circles where we're not even living a quality life, right? And we have time to engage in these things that matter to us more as a society.
But can we build an airport? Can we clear the land rights? Can we get the flight paths? Can we, negotiate with the local community who doesn't like the noise? Not necessarily how DeFi is now, but is that even a realistic thing to get to?
Yeah, so like part of one of the books on my shelf is Code 2.0. So one of the things that I kind of like am odds with is this like the potential for the dystopian future where in creating this technology, all we do is give the governments more control over ourselves, right? Instead of less control. So I believe that uprooting that current ruling class is going to be profoundly difficult. I think that DLT stands a chance, a decentralized public blockchain stands a chance to create a great wealth transfer and a transition of power, but it is not going to be easy, right? There are a lot of regulatory and powers that control all that. And I am guarded in my belief that they will so easily relinquish it. I don't know if I answered your question.
Kind of. Is the book you're referencing, because I'm going to order it, is it Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace version 2.0 by Lawrence Lessig?
Yes.
Okay, I'll drop it in that chat. That's interesting. So Dave, let me throw this to you. Give me sort of the brass tacks answer. Can we get to specifically an airport?
Yes, literally all human activity, literally any complex operation. People are building giant data centers that do nothing but mine Bitcoin, and they have been incentivized to do so by a protocol that pays every 10 minutes. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars of capital on one site in giant buildings. And yes, today that requires the additional layer of a company and a formal entity, but I don't see any reason that within 5 or 10 years, that's not a DAO, and that maybe in the background somewhere has some tie to a entity in Switzerland or something that is signing paperwork on its behalf. But there's no reason that activity can't be incentivized, funded, the experts selected, and people rewarded for building those massively complex things. Airplanes, rockets, mining asteroids, nuclear fusion. Everything is within this capacity, because all we're really talking about is a different way of doing accounting, of sending value, of collaborating and organizing people. And if I believe this is a better way of organizing people and a better way of communicating and a better way of sharing value that we're creating, then why not? I see no fundamental. It's like if you asked me 30 years ago, is everything going to be on a database? I can think of some things that, that would be a really complex database. We've built really complex databases.
Well, I'm sorry. It's one thing to represent something in a database. It's actually something to physically port it in there. I'm talking about a physical manifest of something that doesn't purely exist in digital land.
Well, but let's, as we were talking about before, Gordon, there's going to be parallel universes. There already are parallel universes, right? Even back as long as, Second Life, there were parallel universes. So when you're flying a plane in the future, I think you're going to have more choice of different airports, and you're going to vote again with your feet, right? You're going to say, God, I only trust the FAA because their alcohol units consumed per minute is higher than everyone else's, or whatever it is, or you're going to say, I've been talking to my friends and they said this new system that does auto landing on a decentralized system that that takes over and makes my atoms part of a larger machine, and I trust in it because it's open source. It's been proven, repetitively by third parties, and I know what happens. I mean, the truth is, while you trust the FAA and you trust the legacy systems for airports, you don't really know what's happening inside of that control tower, right? You don't know if another larger need is going to be fulfilled at your expense without telling you, where you've been deemed expendable because something else has happened. Whereas if you're in an open system, you'll at least know what the hierarchy of decisions are, and you'll know that those decisions are happening contrary to you, and you can then make your decision to change.
But you can be back with, you can be back with the issue that Medha mentioned, which is it's not going to be, yes, the information will be available, but that doesn't mean you have the facility to understand it as a normal consumer. Even if the FAA was open source, I'd be like, what the hell is this widget? And I'm not going to take that time to learn it because am I going to learn that for nuclear?
Well, you would not be a pilot whose plane I would jump on very quickly.
Oh,
Right?
James.
I'm sorry. I would pick the pilot who, by crowdsourcing and intelligence of the crowd, had told me has done this 1 billion times, and this guy is Han Solo. No matter what happens, it ends up okay.
So you envision this world where we're going to select our pilots by their reputation score, and just hopefully you don't catch them in that one day where they take a 50% cut.
I see that. I see the world as fractals, and I think that all these different decisions will follow the same types of methodologies and platforms. And I do see that I will be able to see more and better into the systems I want to join, and have the ability to make a fully informed decision instead of shut up and get on that plane. I'll tell you if there's a bomb later, right?
Cool. Yeah. Let me ask another question to Medha and to David. We alluded to market regulation and people sort of voting with their feet and with their coins or crypto dollars, whatever, about whether they like this system or whether they don't like that system. And that is sort of a nice Darwinistic form of regulation, because the stuff that's good and honest kind of works, and the stuff that isn't, people just, it goes down. How do you handle the externalities caused by some of these things? So for the non-participants, the ones who aren't voting, but who are nonetheless affected. Like, when the stock market crashed, you didn't need to own stock to get affected by it. You were caught in the wake of what transpired. Mm-hmm. Does that concept even cross over in the world of DeFi? And I suggest it does. If anything,
it absolutely does. Yeah, I mean, it already has, right?
How do you wrangle that? It'd just be super clear. How do you wrangle externalities for non-participants who are nonetheless affected?
You want to take that one, David? I mean, this is a big one.
Sure. I'm happy to. So
go for it.
let's again look at history. Where have the worst externalities happened? If I use a statistic like
Berkeley, California,
arable land destroyed as a percentage of the total country, I look at the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. Something like 10% of all arable land was utterly destroyed through oil spills, through chemical spills. If there are no property rights, there's no way for anybody who's affected by an externality to speak up or have any voice. And you get these insane situations where on an enormous level, mass destruction, mass pollution, right? Even if I look at environmental regulations in the United States today, the government hands out a permit to pollute only up to this level. Only 10,000 tons of lead in the water, please. That's the limit. That's as much as we can have. And the people with property rights have no recourse because that company has a Title V permit that says I can put this much pollution or this much lead in the water or whatever it is, right? This is not a great way of limiting externalities. So imagine a system where people do have property rights and they can immediately take action, whether it's withdrawing from the system or voting for a different node or whatever you have, that is so much better.
Sorry, Dave, I'm gonna break in. I'm with you generally that when you're in the system, participating, have property rights, great. Okay, I'm talking about non-participants, and this kind of gets to one of our points, which is, must you join in order to self-protect? What if I don't want to join? What if I just want to walk down the street?
But I think the biggest externality, a situation where you have unfettered externalities, is war, right? Because leaders choose to go to war, and citizens die, right? And citizens' property is destroyed. When you don't even know if you have the support of the population to be in that situation. And it's been pointed out that democracies don't start wars. Right?
No. It's been pointed out that, and it's not true that democracies don't fight wars with each other. Certainly democracies start wars.
Give an example.
Iraq. Did Iraq invade us, or did we invade Iraq?
I'm sorry, is the US a democracy?
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Is anyone?
Exactly.
Name me one large power that you think is a democracy that hasn't started wars.
Right.
I mean, come on.
The Athenians were the last one.
Oh yeah, there's Athens and Sparta never got into anything. You're right. Checkmate, my friend.
Athens didn't start it. So I think that the way you deal with externality is by opening the playing field and by having shared information and enabling people to choose the systems that they participate in. I think that what we're talking about actually answers your question, right?
Yeah.
Because if I want to go to war, I'll join a system that wants to go to war, and I'll strap on and get my AR-17 or 47 or whatever it's called, and I'll run around and talk about my constitutional rights, right? Or if I don't believe in that, and I would rather educate, and build beautiful things and share love, then I can do that. I believe that you should have the choice to choose. And that's what these new platforms, enable, I think.
Again, we're getting back to the person who opts in, or even knows that they have the ability to opt in. And I'm specifically kind of put it in the DeFi space. It is potentially possible. Right now, crypto and DeFi are still sort of niche. I think we all hope that they break out and become the majority position, then finally the absolute position. I don't really see a need for fiat at all once these things fully develop. But once all the eggs are in this basket, okay, and your grandma, okay, or a kid or something, the things that happen within these systems will have external effects, and you can't, as a human, track them all and control them all. And I think there's an argument for, I don't know if it's government regulation, okay, to Dave's point, okay, but I think there's some kind of thing that needs to put a box around these entities so that non-participants aren't in the splash zone if something goes massively wrong. And you can kind of hand wave it.
Isn't that called a hard fork?
Well, it's a hard fork again for the people involved.
I think consumer choices are exactly what we're talking about. What we're talking about are companies that provide products and services. And if they're terrible to their employees or terrible to the environment, they end up with a bad reputation, lose investors, lose consumers, and people make a choice. We've seen massive shifts in corporate behavior the last 50 or 100 years because of customers' pressure and buying choice, right? That is the ultimate choice.
Sorry, again, you're talking about a participant. So suppose I'm the neighbor of the polluting plant. I'm not a participant. I'm not a customer. I'm just someone who's nearby.
Right, and you have it's a couple of things. In the blockchain world, if we're talking about digital use cases, I have my private keys, and maybe I'm holding some Ethereum. If somebody does something on Casper, it has no effect on me in the sense of it does not affect my keys and my ownership of certain tokens. And if I see the light and Casper has built something beautiful, I can go over there and join them. But there's a individuality. We're getting away from the tragedy of commons. That's the entire point. The way you get rid of the tragedy of the commons is to get rid of the commons. That is what I want to do. There should be no commons. We should all have our own identities. We should all have our own property rights. And that's what we're getting to, a much more fine-grained ownership of our identities, of our digital value, of all of our property than we've ever had before. The solution is not how can we make the commons slightly less terrible, it's just get rid of the commons.
Let's bring this back to DeFi for a second, because you just tickled something that I've been thinking about for the last day or two. Uniswap is about to have a really interesting governance / real world event, in that on the 17th they're gonna unlock all these. They're ending the current program. The next program hasn't been chosen by the crowd yet, and there's a big question: what happens to all those uni, and what happens to those billions of dollars of ether that are locked up that are no longer going to be earning uni? So I'm looking at this thing now, and this is very much like what David's talking about, or sorry, what Gordon's talking about, because there's going to be a bunch of people. If I think what's going to happen, just to lay the cards on the table, is that all this stuff is going to unbundle for a little while. There's going to be a little bit of uncertainty, which becomes very fertile ground for the next round of change and the next round. But pain is what causes the change. And I think what's going to happen is that for a moment in time, which I can't define this moment, so it's like an Einsteinian kind of moment, there's going to be uncertainty. And I think people are going to sell their ether because it's going to be free, and they're going to have to do something with it, and humans can't live with a vacuum, right? And so I actually think that what's going to happen is you're going to see a bunch of people who now have free Ether who are not earning the yield, who are now looking for the next new thing to do with their Ether because they can't just let it sit there for some reason. And personally, I think Ethereum's going to drop. And I think you're going to see some of the top 10 altcoins and Bitcoin jump as there's a reallocation in the market, which may or may not be long term, but I think will be, at least, a blip on a chart. I just don't know how long the term is in that chart. So I think Gordon's question to Medha and to David is, as an individual, how do you deal with that level of uncertainty? Are we just always having to pay attention, or will something about the development of DeFi start to take over and help you weather these storms and smooth out the peaks and valleys? Medha?
So if I were to look at this, I would look at what happens in the stock market today. I feel like there's a lot of similarities, right, between these DeFi protocols and what you see in stocks today. I think information will absolutely be key, and there will be information resources. Just as that this event will happen, there will be people performing analysis, and I'll choose the most trustworthy source for this type of information and, keep up on it, right, if I'm managing my portfolio carefully. I think it's going to be about personal responsibility and information, and there'll be a strong incentive because I want to protect my assets, right? So I feel like this is a pattern that people already know how to do, and I just see that the same kind of patterns will emerge.
David, you have a thought, or you?
No, I agree with that. I think, there's just going to be more and more user interface that smooths over so many of these transitions. We're already seeing aggregators that you put into the aggregator, and it's maybe not even you that was staking into Uni or providing liquidity in that trading pair, but it was the aggregator you signed up for. And like you said, the moment that aggregator sees less return in that trading pair, it's going to switch somewhere else. I don't know necessarily if it puts pressure on Ethereum, because the something else might also be using Ether, right? Or some stable coin that they were sitting in. Right now, Uni lets you do liquidity provision and get Uni, I think, for ETH to USDC, ETH to DAI, ETH to wrapped Bitcoin, ETH to USDT. Those are the 4 pairs. They're all against ETH, right? So half of all of that liquidity had to be sitting in ETH, and it might well go to somewhere else where they're staking ETH. So it depends on what the alternatives are and where the good return is. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Uniswap community wants to retain all of that liquidity and all of those users and ends up passing something else that gives them another incentive. So I think those kind of things will smooth out over time. I'm almost always surprised how the market doesn't have as big a reaction as I expect from a big move, because people are making so many different choices about what they want to do. And very rarely do I see an event where it ever makes everybody move in the same direction.
Right. I also think there's, how curves, we originally, the digital curves had big quantum changes, so you could see the jagged edges, and it just couldn't compare to an analog curve, right? And I think what's happening over time is that the amplitude of the difference between the digital and the analog curve is smoothing as the market gets more efficient and there's more people paying attention and things are happening faster. So I think that just like you look at things historically that were so significant, and then you look at it in a longer term perspective and you realize that they're blips, you can't even see the blips. When you were going through it, you thought you were living through a tidal wave. So, I think that one of the trends that's happening right now that has to happen for there to be mass adoption of DeFi is simplification, right? And is that more of a marketing concept or a technology concept right now?
I think it's mostly marketing. I don't think there are a lot of technological barriers. You just need people that are really good at UI to come along and put together beautiful applications that have fiat rails, and that with one click of a button, somebody can get exposure to all of this interest and yield. I mean, that's what people are starving for right now is, bonds aren't offering anything. I don't know if you've tried to, get more than 3 or 4% interest anywhere that's relatively safe. Like, it's not there, right? And everybody's expecting a stock market correction. It's totally disconnected right now from reality of the economy. And so, yeah, people are starving for yield. That's why $15 billion has flowed into DeFi, and we may see $100 billion flow into DeFi. So, yeah, I'm very optimistic on that trend continuing. It's just a matter of sort of resetting where, you know, people got way ahead of themselves and they were taking a lot of risk and they were chasing the 100% yield. But all these projects doing 7 to 10% yield, the sustainable stuff with real backing and real use, you know, those aren't going anywhere. Those are going to get more and more usage the next few years.
Yeah, David, as you're talking and talking about the UI, I got just a vision of Minority Report, and I had this visual fantasy of you're sitting there, you're just moving your assets around, you know, popping them up, down, and that would be amazing. You know, it'd be wonderful to have a direct link between your mind, your physicality, and just where your life was organized.
No, it's the opposite.
The
best interface is no interface. All of that will be happening, but it is a machine. It is a bot. It is an algorithm in the back end that is doing all of that resetting, not, you know, the human that has been trained to perfectly know all these markets. It's going to be our
cool when he did
friends.
it.
Yes, our robot friends. Maybe we'll make a visual of our robot friends moving things around for us.
There you go. Okay, I'm making note to self about making that a marketing piece.
I think it's more like
big red button. Like,
so wait, the next Elon Musk project will be like a neural DeFi interface.
I think it's more like Skynet than it is a Minority Report. So it's a Terminator.
You're kind of letting away to my externality argument. Like, we'll be defended. Nothing will go wrong. It's perfectly decentralized. Oops. So
when the computers realize they don't need us anymore is when we have a problem.
Well, that's the thing. The computers have a great deal right now. But guys, AIs already exist. We're paying the Google AI, you know, $70 billion a year or whatever in time and attention and ads, and it gets enormous amounts of electricity and computational power. They're doing fine. Like, this is the AIs have already taken over the world, and what they want you to do is look at a screen all the time. Like,
I mean, I'm looking at you guys on the screen. Who knows if this could just be one big deep fake. Medha, are you really? Medha, are you really there? Is that
I'm really here?
Okay,
I'm real.
That wasn't
cool.
convincing.
IRL in real life, right?
Just checking.
So guys, I think we're gonna close up at the top of the hour, so we have 10 minutes left. Just for everyone that's out there, next week we're gonna do the yin and the yang, privacy and identity as our topic, and we'll announce our speakers shortly. You know, Medha, first of all, I'm all in favor of unabashed, self-promotion. So if you want to talk about Casper in the last moment, that's fine. And any last thoughts you have,
Gosh, yeah, I'm really excited to be and grateful to be part of this space. I think there's tremendous opportunity and promise for us to do great things for humanity. It sounds kind of like cliche, but I really do believe that. That's what gets me up and gets me excited every morning. I think that there's an opportunity for us to leverage greater trust in all the things that we do in terms of reputation and identity using permissionless blockchain technology. And I'm very excited and quite optimistic that Casper is going to play a huge role in that because of what we built. It gives people more power and control to participate in the governance of DeFi projects and governance of code, and even for themselves, right, in terms of their own wallet. So, yeah, really excited to be here, and thanks for having me on. Oh, we lost you, James. Can't hear you. You're muted.
James, you're muted. Okay.
I always say my most brilliant things when I'm on mute.
Well, just say it again, man.
So, David, closing thoughts.
So I just want to encourage people to remember the roots of what has made this ecosystem great, and remember, the original vision of, having no counterparties and having no reserves, and going back to those roots are the projects that succeed the best. It's tempting to run out there and create a quick company and try to cash in on the hype. None of those things are around 5 or 10 years from now. It's things that are aligned with the fundamentals of the ecosystem. So keep it decentralized, keep it permissionless, keep pushing towards those ideals, even though we're not all the way there yet. The companies and the decentralized open source projects that keep that in mind, I think are going to flourish. And so support people that are doing something different, not just copycats that are trying to make a quick buck. Really focus in on the projects that are going to make a big impact. So, you know, I've had a lot of fun with that the last year with PegNet, and there are so many other projects like Helium and others that are pushing the envelope. And so go support those and be a little contrarian, and you know, leave the daily speculation and stuff to others.
Gordon, what are your thoughts?
I'm just excited to be part of this and that we started this up, and I think our next week will be fantastic. And I think, you know what, I don't know if I have any particular thought, but between hodl and buildle, I say do both. You know, don't get caught up in the momentary drama, but you know, keep invested and keep working.
Absolutely.
So first of all, I just want to, Medha and David, thank you so much for being on our inaugural show. You guys are fantastic. I learn every time I interact with you guys, you know, and every time I think I have a gotcha when I'm talking, you know, I just really learn so much.
James,
so really
are you actually trying to gotcha these two? I mean, I think you and I are pawns, and we're, you know, we're like disposable pieces here.
I really do appreciate. I think that it's fantastic. You know, I formed PALcapital in 1996 to focus on businesses that were going to benefit from the digitization of information. And back in 1996, everyone said I was crazy, and they said that's not a business. And now, essentially, you know, people look at me and say that's crazy. It's every business. And I really look forward to, you know, having this conversation next year and 5 years from now, and chuckling about, you know, the things that we took for granted that we didn't realize were so important, and the big things that were already happening that we didn't understand how important they were, that weave themselves into the daily activity and into our, you know, into our reality. And on that note, I really just want to say thank you so much. And I look forward to everyone next week.
Thank you very much.
Great show, guys. Thank you so
Bye.
much. Well
Bye,
done.
guys.
Good job.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Cool.
I ended the stream.
Yeah, it is. It says live on custom streaming service. But okay, bye guys.